Uh,
We are, we are recording.
our recording. So thank you, Debbie, for the invitation to come and share this piece of work with you this evening. So my name's Dr. Alina Congreve. I've worked as a lecturer and principal lecturer in several universities before becoming a freelance and ability consultant from 2019. And the piece of research I'd like to share with you this evening is looking at opening up more pathways into ecology careers. Some of you might have attended the CIEEM Autumn Conference or the webinar version of that before Christmas back in November. The session this evening, I've adjusted quite a bit to try and bring out some of the findings from that piece of work for people who in one way or another are involved with education. So you might be working in a university or an FE college, or you might be someone who has close links with education, someone working in practice, but with strong links to education, or indeed someone working in a freelance training or professional development capacity. So if some of these looks a little bit familiar, you might have heard some before Christmas, but hopefully there'll also be quite a lot new for you this evening as well. So without more ado, we will crack on. This is going to be an interactive session, not to scare you, because you do not need to put your cameras on if you'd rather not. But we have got some activities to do. I'm quite aware it's about 6 o'clock on a dark evening in January. So there will be some things to keep us all awake through the session this evening. So without more ado, I'm going to share my screen and make a start. So I'm start. So this piece of work was conducted with my colleague Neil Smith, who can't join us this evening. Neil has a particular background working in policy. So for a number of years, he worked for DEFRA, and that experience was invaluable in helping to hone the recommendations to the kind of policy audiences that we're looking to reach. So without more ado, to move on to the substance. So there's widely regarded to be a capacity crisis in the ecology profession, that there aren't enough people with ecological skills to fill posts that we have at the moment, let alone some of the needs we have coming up and the medium-term needs. So how do we attract, train, retain and upskill ecologists to meet future demands? And how do we go about addressing the capacity crisis in the profession? We hear a lot about the short-term pressures. So in England, that'd be about biodiversity net gain. But there are many medium-term pressures as well, like having enough people with the right skills to carry out peatland restoration, planting the right trees in the right places, to conduct natural flood risk management and give ecological advice on that. And all of the new infrastructure that we're going to need. So we're going to need ecological assessments and appraisals at much of the new low carbon infrastructure. We'll need to transition our economy. And currently, recruitment into ecology roles relies almost entirely on people coming through graduate and increasingly postgraduate routeways. So someone may do, say, biology degree and then do an ecology postgraduate qualification. And that's become the entry route for the majority of people into ecology jobs. One way of addressing the capacity crisis is to improve routeways into the profession, people joining with other kinds of qualifications, particularly people joining with vocational qualifications, and to open up routes for mid-career changes. So ecology, nature, wildlife are very popular hobbies and personal interests for many people. There are people who are passionate about bird watching or particular species, but also about nature and wildlife in general. And the COVID crisis led a lot of us to perhaps think about our career and what we were doing and why we're doing it, and to perhaps consider a career change. But starting a degree, or for some of the people, a second degree from scratch, can be very daunting, both the time commitment, but also importantly, the budgetary commitment as well. So are there routes, are there ways in which we can support those mid-career changes too, through providing more diverse routeways into the ecology profession? So to help unpack some of that and answer some of those questions, back in April and May, myself, my colleague Neil ran a series of workshops right across the sector. So we engaged with 70 participants overall. Those are people working in ecological consultancies, the kind of, I guess, the bread and butter side membership. We wanted to make sure we got the full range of ecology employers. So we sought out people working in local government and also AONBs and national parks, environmental NGOs, government regulators, and people working in education and training provider organisations. The overwhelming majority of the people who took part in the workshops were involved in one way or another in the recruitment and management of teams of ecologists. Most of them were ecologists themselves, but some of them also managed multidisciplinary teams. So it's perhaps quite common, say, in local government, that the landscape and landscape architecture and ecology and archaeology are part of one team. So the ecologists may be being managed by someone, say, with a landscape or an archaeology background. It can be quite tricky to talk about recruitment and how we bring people into the profession and what skills we need without it perhaps reflecting on their own particular organisation. So we used a recruitment game which we called the Dream Team to look at how we bring people in and to start a discussion and to open up and people feel confident in sharing their thoughts about how we appoint people and what we're looking for with different kinds of qualifications. We also carried out a survey of which attracted 138 new entrants into the ecology professions. These are all people who've joined very recently, so they can reflect on both their educational experience and what it's like to work in their first ecology job. And we were delighted to have the assistance of the job and recruitment website Environment Job, who shared with us over 2,000 entry-level job advertisements for ecologists, which ran from June 21 to 23, and to be able to do analysis on that. Finally, we carried out 23 expert interviews. Some of those people working in policy, in strategic roles. Others were people who had a cross-sector perspective. And then to try and bring all those different views together to look for recommendations. I should qualify that this was a piece of work that looked across the United Kingdom and Ireland. So we had good levels of participation in the workshops and from the survey entrants, and for the most part from the jobs from all of the countries, from Wales, Scotland, and the Republic of Ireland. Where the situation is particularly acute, and they have already been taking some steps to address that along the lines in this piece of work. So what did they say? So first of all, sharing with you one of the things I thought you'd be most interested in, what these employers thought about new graduates. So what their thinking was on the skills that graduates were coming out with. And across all of those 7 workshops, there was a strong consensus and a sense of frustration at some of the skills they felt the graduates were lacking. So very common concerns were the lack of species identification skills and the lack of practical field skills. So those came up time and time and time again. There's also some frustration about graduates' experience with environmental law and policy, that although they covered it, they found that was often people that they recruited had no idea how to apply that to a real world situation. And often it was how they described weirdly out of date. There were some specific things. So people working in AONBs and national parks were feeling people should come in with, say, more land management. And the regulators were somewhat frustrated that graduates didn't even know what their organisation did or what their responsibilities were. And some of these just start to compound together. So for regulators, they wanted people who knew about budgets, who knew about capacity, who knew about regulations, and they didn't feel that people leaving degrees now were able to bring those things together. So that actually leads on quite neatly into our thinking then about how things from the perspective of those joining the profession. So that was what employers thought, but what did people starting out as ecologists think? And many of those skills that employers were looking for that people weren't getting on their degrees The vast majority of the people carrying out the survey were carrying out volunteering to try and acquire those skills that they didn't achieve or didn't gain on their degrees. So some of these were actually quite distressing. So it was quite upsetting reading dozens and dozens of people expressing their frustration, the sort of pressures they were under in trying to take up their first ecology job, that they thought they'd been completing a degree, in leaving a degree course, they'd be setting themselves up in a good position for employment. Many found that wasn't the case, and they had to supplement that with lengthy periods of unpaid volunteering. And you can see from some of the quotes here, those are representative of the feedback that we got from new entrants into the ecology profession. I'll just stop talking for a second, just give you a moment to read those. Of course, it's from new entrants' perspective, they were in a very good position to reflect then on what skills they wished they'd acquired. So there were certainly things about the course that they valued, but when you ask them what things they wished they'd learnt more about, they were very thoughtful and very, very articulate in the things they wanted to know more. So there's quite significant overlap between the things they identified and the things that employers were looking for. So they particularly highlighted practical field skills, ecological survey skills. Again, a strong overlap there with employers, environmental legislation, environmental planning. They also wanted more opportunities to find out more about ecology careers. They wanted more networking opportunities, more work placements, more ways of finding out what kind of ecology jobs were out there. They wanted some of the kind of skills that you need to be able to work in the workplace, something called the consultancy skills, communication skills, workplace skills. They wanted to be more employer ready and to have more opportunities to practice some of those skills within their qualifications. Some of these were skills they had already. So some of them did have, say, some ecological survey work or some GIS on their degrees. But those were things where they felt to be ready for the workplace and to be able to access the kind of career path that they wanted to go down. They wished there'd been a lot more emphasis on in their degree program. Which I guess then opens up a conversation about where some skills are best acquired. It wouldn't be possible for any degree course to cover absolutely everything that anyone could want to know in any ecology career. And some skills are best developed in the workplace. So they're ones that employers should be spending time developing. And there's perhaps some expectations here from employers that are not reasonable in terms of what you can expect from someone starting out in their first job. And that there's a need for them to think and invest. So I'd like to spend perhaps 8 or 10 minutes now with you as a bit of a group, trying to think some of this through together. So which knowledge and skills do you think are best developed at university? Which knowledge and skills are actually better developed in a workplace? Or are there some other settings where we should develop those skills? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and put a link in the chat to a virtual whiteboard that's got an exact copy of that slide that you were shown just now. So if you click on that and follow the link, that will take you through to the whiteboard. You'll be appearing on the whiteboard as anonymous. So you'll be an anonymous animal when you get there. Oh, and I can already see quite a few anonymous otters and geese and kiwis. That's all nice. So for those of you who've not used Jamboard before, I'll just quickly go back to sharing my screen again. You can add your thoughts by clicking on the sticky note thing on the left. There's a toolbar on the left. It's got a sticky note thing. If you click on the sticky note thing, you can add your thoughts and then click save. And then you can drag it to where you want it to go. So there's no need to put your cameras on. You can stay entirely anonymous with this if you like. and start adding your thoughts there on the left with the sticky notes. Is everyone in all right? So do ask or put a query in the chat if you're having any. Oh, yeah, I see the first one's got now. That's great. Oh, yeah, got ecology theory, ecology basic concepts. Those are things that we should be doing at university or during our studies. Okay, do keep them coming. You're also allowed to have more than one, so do feel free to put several up there. Oh yes, training and support to obtain licenses, e.g. BATs. Yes, that was a very sore point among many of the survey respondents, that they were doing that at their own expense, rather than either their employer or their place of education paying for it. So that definitely is one where there needs to be more support of people entering the profession, so they're not paying for this and having to do lengthy volunteering themselves. So yeah, the licenses stuff is certainly a thorny issue.
I put that one up because for me, I spent 2 seasons when I very first started. I spent 2 seasons of my summer every single weekend in a field with the bat group trying to get my bat license. And then at the end of 2 years, when I was then obviously in a full-time job as well, it became quite difficult. I then also had a child, so it's even more difficult. And then when I asked for my bat license at the time, they said, yeah, maybe if you do like 3 more seasons with us. And I just felt like that was a lot to ask, you know?
Yeah. And it's not something that perhaps happens in other related professions. So BES were quite involved in some of the discussions with this, and they were pointing out that there are other careers that biology graduates go into where people have reasonably well paid part-time posts, and that's how they gain professional certifications, not through lengthy unpaid volunteering. So, just would anyone like to thanks, that's really helpful contribution at the bats. Is there anyone else who'd like to unmute themselves and elaborate on the points that they've made?
I can jump in again if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it, Annie.
I also put on there just about the awareness of the need to obtain licenses and awareness of what you need in the future. So for me, I came in slightly differently. I didn't do a consultancy related degree. I did a conservation biology degree, and I didn't have in my head about becoming a consultant specifically. So I wasn't actually aware that, you know, there was this need to obtain licenses and have this kind of small amount of volunteering, I'll say, behind you before you can actually get a job. So I think I found that out quite late on, and then was almost at a disadvantage. And there was other people who perhaps hadn't been doing it as long as I had, who were kind of climbing way above me because they they were aware of this. So I guess it's just providing that to everyone so that people are aware that that's what they need to do in the future, if that makes sense. Put more of an emphasis on that.
Oh, absolutely, Annie. And that came through with several of the respondents. They was when we asked them about volunteering and their volunteering experience, they were saying, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know it was something I was supposed to be doing. And then it all got a bit late. So they got to, halfway through their third year and they found out that was something they perhaps could have been doing, and weren't aware it was something that was so important to their future prospects. And indeed, having exposure to different career pathways and knowing that consultancy is a thing, and it's one of the larger career pathways in ecology. So yeah, thanks. That's really useful to flag that up there.
Can I just step in here and say that I think this the whole idea of the need for volunteering is fundamentally wrong. I think for people to do some work experience to decide on what path they want to go down is fine. And I think that works for all professions. But this idea of volunteering and that you should be doing it, I just think is unacceptable for a profession. And
yeah, thanks, Debbie. And I think those of you who then after the session find time to dip into the report will find those views very strongly reflected in there. And there are other ways of doing this. I mentioned before that the BES were involved, that they were talking about other opportunities for, say, biology students, that they can take well-paid summer placement work paid at above living wage. And that compares quite poorly with the summer offers for ecologists. And as Annie was just saying, being strung along, so getting the promise of a permanent job after volunteering, and that's not materialising.
it also happens after seasonal work. I've had students who've been taken on as seasonal surveyors, 0 hours contracts, very poor rates of pay, not very good conditions, and they've been strung along with, well, if you do this, we'll give you a permanent job at the end of the season, and then it never happens.
Yes, quite.
I think the other issue that I think needs to be touched on is the very low wages in the sector.
Yeah, and we'll come on to that and the employer survey in a moment. Greg's got his hand up. So, Greg, did you want to chip in?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, tell me if this isn't the right time to sort of raise this issue, but there's just a couple of things I'd like to do. First, I'd like to just take Debbie's point and acknowledge it is a real issue. And I think we've got something on our hands which isn't particularly. I was running a service for a multidisciplinary company a while back. The volunteering was an absolutely key element that I looked at for anyone proposing to take on a job. Not so much because I wanted that experience, but it demonstrated one thing that I felt was really valuable as an employer, and that's dedication. I just felt that people can always be trained up, they can always learn more. But volunteering in the real sense of the word, i.e. not doing something, a lot of people came in, they had to do a degree placement, which I didn't sort of count as volunteering. That sort of volunteering did demonstrate to me a real commitment to not so much just the job, but actually to ecology and environmental matters. And to me, that was a really valuable thing. And I remember, it was quite a few years ago when I was like taking people on, but it was something I really looked at. So there is that element about volunteering which is important.
And I think that was where it's interesting. I think that's where it's interesting to have the dream team game and the characters in the game who people, employers were looking at recruiting, had various different kinds of experiences. So there were some people that had gone on expensive volunteering holidays and gone turtle watching. There were people who had volunteered at their weekends at the local wildlife trust. And there were people who weren't able to take up either of those opportunities because they had to work. So for many students now, the financial reality is that work isn't just something that you do for a few hours on a Sunday in a pub to pay for your holiday. That for certainly for some students, work is absolutely essential to their financial survival. And some of them may even be significant wage earners for their household. So to then ask them or expect them to carry out volunteering as a sign of dedication creates issues for a profession that's already struggling with its capacity crisis. And it was
Yeah,
notable that many of the people who are in recruitment roles now, including people my age, were fortunate enough to go through university at a time when there were no tuition fees.
Mm.
So they're in a very different financial position when they started their first ecology job to many young people now.
It's really
I'm
true.
sorry, I can't put my hand up for some reason.
Maybe that's because of the host.
Oh, okay. Hosts can't put their hand up. Can I just come back on this and say that I feel that something that people need to do voluntarily is develop their field skills. Now, that's not the same as doing a voluntary position, which quite often is going along and spending a few hours for a wildlife trust. It's not necessarily valuable, but in my role teaching, I've always argued that I can't teach people field skills. I can point them in the right direction. I can give them the resources. I can show them how to use keys, and I can set them assignments that require them to go out and learn how to identify, for example, plants. But the idea that a university can teach that, I think is just not correct. But I agree with Greg that shows a commitment, but I would say that's a much better way of showing commitment and doing, yeah.
And there's also
weekends with the Wildlife Trust or something.
There's also questions, I think, about the quality of some of that volunteering experience. Are people
Definitely
actually getting plant ID, or are they stuffing envelopes?
Yes.
And are there other people who are perhaps semi-retired who might like to get together over a cup of tea and a biscuit and stuff some envelopes and chat to other people? So there are also, I think, issues around the quality of a lot of that volunteering opportunities as well, which actually leads
the diversity issue. This, you were saying, people who can't afford. A lot of my students came from London, were from diverse ethnic backgrounds. None of them could drive. None of them had driving licenses, which is on your next slide.
Yep.
And that barrier, the financial barrier, they could earn more carrying on working in supermarkets and doing their naturalist volunteer, if you like, citizen science naturalist work in their spare time.
It's worth noting that there are certain issues around race and inclusion with the expectations around car ownership with so many ecology roles, and that 50% of people from BAME backgrounds don't have a driving license. That effectively means your parents don't run a car, they don't have a driving license. How do you then, as a 21, 22-year-old, then apply for a job that requires you to have a driving license and to run a car to take up your very first job? So this, I guess, is I guess you call it a spoof, but it's sadly not. That it's really kind of an averaging out of those over 2,000 entry-level jobs, that for the majority, there's a good chance you're required to work evenings and weekends, other antisocial hours, that you're paid only slightly above the full-time minimum wage, little bit better in Scotland, but not much, and that it's notably lower than the UK graduate starting salary, and significantly lower than salaries for other biology graduates, and significantly lower than many of the other people in a team that you're working with. So if you're in a multidisciplinary team with engineers and surveyors and planners and landscape architects, all of those will be earning more than you as an ecologist. And very, very few jobs offer an opportunity for a work vehicle. The overwhelming majority expect to have your own car. The majority of roles don't offer any in-job training. So the employers haven't thought about what their responsibilities are, whether that's for equipment or protected species licensing, let alone anything more structured in terms of a more kind of organized or well-developed graduate program. And that half of those are part-time. So there's a 50% chance that having got this job, you'll need to look for a new one at the end of the summer survey season. So that was a rather depressing and frustrating set of analysis on what the job offer is for people starting out in their ecology careers, and all thanks to Environment Job providing that large data set and their shared sense of of frustration in employers on the one hand complaining to them about not being able to recruit, but on the other hand, when you come to look at the offer, and their reflection on it as someone hosting many of these job websites, that were in the instances where employers were offering structured training and better conditions and contracts, they were able to appoint people with the skills they needed. And we did identify several examples of employers paying under the minimum wage, which isn't a legal thing. Perhaps that moves on to the next part of the report, which was looking at other route ways in. So given the frustration that many employers have with the skills that graduates have, and the lack of then plugging that through lots of unpaid volunteering, we then started to talk to employers about what skills people from vocational career pathways had. And we found this really nice symmetry here, where the skills that vocational entrants typically come with, strong practical field skills, species ID skills, knowledge of land management, strong interpersonal skills, good team working, were almost entirely mirroring the positive things that graduates are bringing. So graduates bringing research skills, foundations in science, which several of you picked up in the last activity about people having that core knowledge of ecology, good data analysis skills, report writing skills. So there's a really nice symmetry there between what graduates are bringing and what they're perhaps short on, and then what people from vocational routes are bringing. Which I guess opens up the possibility that you could have teams where those people work together. And one of the ideas that we started to work up was the idea of an ecologist technician. So in other environmental technical jobs, there's an environmental technical role and we sort of tried to work out how this might work out in ecology. So the graduate ecologist and the ecologist technician both go out and do field work together. The technician's got strong skills in surveying and ID. And this would be, I guess, be common for many employers, that they're very reluctant to permit lone working in most instances. Once they've collected the data, then the graduate ecologist leads on the report writing and the analysis. But is there a possibility in the future that some of that becomes more automated? So AI is starting to change the ways in which ecology reports are written, and we saw some striking examples of how it can speed up and streamline ecology report writing at the autumn conference this year. So rather than forcing someone who's got good plant ID skills, got good outdoor skills, trying to make them write a report, something that they're not very good at and dislike doing, thinking about other ways in which that labour could be divided up. And then for consultancies, this perhaps presents some opportunities. So at the moment, consultancies might recommend certain measures are implemented in sort of mitigation or enhancement. But if they had people in the ecologist technician role, could some of them actually do that habitat management? Does that open up new business opportunities for them to be able to not just recommend it in a report, but actually have people with the skills to be able to deliver it? And the ecologist technician could then lead on the practical implications and the implementation. So to start to think about how we disrupt some of the existing job roles, and to stop boxing people out of ecology careers because they don't have particularly good skills in report writing, but bring many other very valuable skills to the profession. And it's worth looking here at what some other sectors are doing. One quite close to us in forestry, where they've really thought carefully about what different skills you need at which level. So you have level 1 and 2 arborists and forest craftsperson. They're the people out there on site doing stuff with trees, but they have knowledge about why they're doing what they're doing. So they're not just waving chainsaws around. They have training to know why they're carrying out particular activities and why they're doing work on those trees, and to do it in a safe way as well. Then we've got people working at level 4. We've got arboriculturalists. They're the people managing that team. So they need to have both people skills, but also some ecology skills, and to be able to take decisions on site, and to have good tree knowledge and good ecology knowledge to be able to do that. And then we have people coming in at level 6. We've got professional foresters. And they're people who can think about perhaps some of the longer term implications. They're thinking about things like, well, how will climate change affect this planting? How do I keep these 6 different landowners on board? So they're people who also have that kind of strategic role as well. The forestry profession is also really interesting in the way it's been able to quantify and to advocate for this. So they've done a lot of work putting numbers on how many of these people we need. So at a national level, we've got ambitious targets around tree planting. They're able to put numbers on the numbers of these people at different levels that we need to have, and to leverage in significant amounts of extra funding for their profession around skills and professional development, to show that that's essential to be able to meet these ambitious tree planting targets in national policy. And to get good alignment, so they've managed to have a progression here. So if someone's showing real promise at level 2 and 3, they've got the next step up to level 4 and the next step up to level 6. So people can progress up this without really big jumps. At the start, we talked about career changes, and it was interesting speaking to some of these people at the conference in Liverpool, the CIEEM conference, where people perhaps in their 40s and 50s become less keen on climbing trees and are looking for other ways to work in their profession that perhaps don't become so practical or appealing for people sort of later on in their careers. And that, I guess, as a profession, they've also got everything really well aligned. So they've thought about the professional body, about the vocational qualification, and about the academic qualification. So rather than assessing the same person 3 times, they get it all wrapped up into one. So you get your professional certification, your vocational course, and your membership of your body in one go, rather than expecting one person to jump through 3 sets of hoops. At a I guess a much bigger and more strategic scale, we can see that in the National Health Service and healthcare planning. So careers in healthcare that have traditionally been graduate career pathways are being opened up to more vocational career pathways. But the healthcare profession has got that there's no good looking at opening new pathways in if you're not looking at retention. So how do you make healthcare a more desirable profession to be in, both in terms of salary, but also in terms of working conditions? And how can we disrupt some of the ways we're working with things like, say, automation, not expecting doctors to go back to the office and write lots of notes, that there'll be new ways of organising teams and organising the workforce, and that technology, including helping to automate things like report writing and note making, will be changing the ways in which existing job roles are currently organised. So the mantra of that is to train, retain and reform. So I'd like to share an example from some of the positive features that are on vocational programmes from one of the participants in the interviews. This is from Broxbury Melton College, where they've done a lot to think about how you can structure learning across different levels. So during level 2, participants carry out a butterfly test. So they quizzed on their butterflies, so whether they know the different ones. In their level 4, they then design their own transect, and they carry out that survey themselves. They're shown this stuff by member of staff, and they have to deploy it themselves. And students were particularly keen on lecturers and members of staff teaching something by physically showing them it, so they can learn by seeing, but then also learning by doing. So they then have a chance to practice that themselves and become familiar and become confident in that skill. And to know why they're doing a particular activity. So rather than just be given a job to do like pruning an orchard or surveying a river, Melton has thought a lot about how students get the bigger picture in the task they're undertaking. So we hear about vertically integrated projects, VIPs, as an example of good practice and some degree programs, but here the level 2 students are doing some ground preparation around river restoration. The level 4 students do the ecology report. The level 5 students do the project planning. So they're all working on the same project, but doing it at different levels. And that's a really big difference from someone just, say, going out and you know, wielding a piece of kit or surveying some land without them being able to see any reasons why they're doing it. So I guess this is a bit over to you again now. So if you go back to the Jamboard, and this opens, I guess, up into a bit more of a general discussion about what things you think you might be able to do at your own university, your own courses, your own modules, to address some of the skills gap and the capacity crisis in the profession. So if you go back to the board, I'll just put that again in the chat now. And if you go ahead to the next page, so if you flip to next frame up the top, that will take you to the next board. And I guess that leads us into a discussion about anything, any reflections you have about things you might be able to do on your module, things you might do differently at the place of education that you're working at. Oh, thank you, Anonymous Unicorn. You've added an assessment on BNG into your final year module. Good stuff. And it's surprising what you can do sometimes without having to change your regulations. So if you've written your assignments perhaps quite generally that students will deal with a live practical problem, then you can change that as new regulations come in without having the work of changing your module descriptions and the paperwork involved. Ooh. We have a new MSc in applied conservation starting in 2024. Okay. Oh, yep, scaffolding skills. Thank you. More links to past students in employment and networking. Thank you, Anonymous Dolphin. And despite being really, really busy, that's often something alumni would still like to do. So they'd often still like to come back for a couple of hours once a year and retain some connection with the university, meet new graduates. And for them, perhaps there is a little bit of a plus as well, that they're meeting and engaging with people who might then come and work for their organisation in future. I'll leave the board. Oh, more coming. Oh yes, you married a ranger. Congratulations. Oh. And yeah, I guess that's a very direct way, but really valuing people who come with different sets of skills. So it's quite easy for those of us who've come through academic pathways to think as it's the only way of doing it or the natural way of doing it, the best way of doing it, and sometimes forgetting there are other really practical skills out there that are really useful, and maybe we wouldn't be so good at some of those.
Alina, can I come in on a couple of points just whilst people
Yes, yeah, go ahead, Greg. Yeah, keep them coming, but yeah, go ahead, Greg.
I mean, I'm just sort of thinking about a couple of things. One of them is, I think with this whole issue, it's really hard to create a one-size-fits-all situation. I mean, I do this by relating to my own experience. I mean, I came from a pretty strong academic background into ecology, but the thing that really attracted me to ecology, and still does, which is why I've sort of really become a sole trader, a sort of self-employed ecologist, was the fact that I want to be out there still developing my field skills. So the idea of like sort of pigeonholing people into different sections or different approaches, I think may not fit with all. And I think that sort of field skill thing is something that so many ecologists value. And I've seen it in the last 25 years, especially amongst the really senior ecologists within our community. They sort of climb the ladder more and more in the management sector. Then they retire, and what's the first thing they do? They get back into the field. So with me, it's very much about, I think we don't want to, we're very fortunate in ecology to have such an interesting profession to work in. And I think maybe we don't want to lose sight of that for our graduates, despite the tough thing at the beginning.
And that is perhaps something where we can look at other professions. I mean, you get the same things with like environmental engineering or something. People really like the engineering and they're really good at it. And then they get taken away into lots of committees and meetings and management stuff, which they're not very good at and hate. So some other professions have looked at how you provide a career progression route where people can move their career forwards that maintains that technical work, and maybe they can impart that technical knowledge to other younger people in their organization. So yeah, to look at career progression routes, they don't always take you away from the thing you're good at and the thing you love doing. So I completely agree, Greg. This isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. This is perhaps just trying to disrupt some of the pigeonholing we have at the moment. And if we don't disrupt it, I think the AI is going to disrupt it for us. So some things thinking about where we add value and what we're bringing to this. That's and writing a report is something that AI is becoming depressingly good at. So yeah, field skills not so much.
I need to look at that because I must admit I've had a little look at the AI thing, and with respect to sort of writing poetry, and was absolutely shocked and devastated about how good it is. But I'll be really interested to see if it can capture some of the subtleties of the terminology we have to use in writing ecological reports, in terms of almost like the sort of legal basis of where you are if you're challenged on a report in a sort of appeal or a court situation. But I haven't looked, so maybe that's already there, and that's pretty scary.
I mean, there's some demos.
Sorry, I think people are playing around with it and getting quite interesting results in both directions. I'm sorry to interrupt the flow of conversation, but we have about another 5 minutes before we need to be wrapping this up.
Yeah.
So if anybody else has got any comments, this is your moment to step in.
Absolutely. So if anyone would like to talk about the points they've made just now on the board, or indeed, yes, as Debbie was saying, other points and questions. Oh, is there anything in the chat?
No, I don't think there is. What's going to happen to these whiteboards?
Oh, I can PDF them and send them round if that would be helpful.
I think that would be very interesting. Yes. What does everybody else think?
I can leave them open for a little bit. So I can leave them open for, say, for an hour or so after this, and so people have got other thoughts on, and then yes, PDF them and send them to you, Debbie.
That would be great. We could certainly distribute it to everyone. We could distribute them to everyone who booked on the on this event.
Could I just make one final point, which is a sort of broad strategic point, which has always I've always wondered about since the whole vocational discussion has arisen, and that's sort of throwing the question back to you. Is at the moment in the Institute, our entry points are very, very almost entirely, I think, academically based, and I'm interested in how this discussion goes in terms of looking at the benefits of vocational routes, but how we square that with the Institute's very strong academic entry level.
I think that's very interesting. I mean, I think quite a lot of people have trouble with meeting the requirements of the competency framework at the moment. I don't know if anybody else has had that experience. I mean, I do a lot of mentoring people. It's not entirely easy to get into the institute. I think a bit of a rethink would be required.
And there are some interesting parallels in other close races, like I mentioned forestry recently, where they have looked very carefully at how members who've come through more practical and vocational routes can join the profession. So there's some interesting parallels there in the forestry sector. And it has brought a lot of life and a lot of young, but a lot of great people into the profession through looking strategically at the entry routes into it.
You probably know that I'm very keen on apprenticeship and a lot of time and work into developing and supporting the level 7. I mean, I think the not only do we have a very depressing wage structure, and Greg touched on the idea that to get more money, you've got to go and work in an office and stay indoors rather than doing what you want. But I've been absolutely horrified with the level of debt that, I mean, I've stopped teaching the MSc because students were coming out with 50,000 student debt. It was not uncommon. And I think that's deeply shocking. Kate, you want to unmute and make your point?
Sorry, was that me?
Yes, go for it, Kate.
Yeah, so I'm not an ecologist. I've not got technical knowledge, but I do work for an environmental consultancy as their professional development coordinator. It's tricky because I haven't got the technical knowledge, but I am good at rallying people. And what we struggle with most, obviously, is time for people to disseminate their knowledge and provide training opportunities. Hopefully that has massively improved. But yeah, I've been looking at routes into ecology and how we recruit. So yeah, I've been championing this. I've got the benefit of working for a large organisation, and we have trialled this in other areas of the business. So hopefully it will be successful within the ecology teams as well.
Thanks for sharing that, Kate. That's really interesting. And amongst that rather bleak picture I painted earlier, there are, employers such as yourself who are trying their best, who are trying new things, and yeah, that's great to hear about your level 6 apprenticeship, Kate. Yeah. So just got another couple of minutes left. If there are any final comments anyone would like to.
Greg, we've not got much time. I've published on authentic assessment. We've had events discussing authentic assessment in this series. If you want to talk to me about authentic assessment, I'm sure you know how to get hold of me. I don't think we can talk about it now, really. I mean, basically it means forget essays, dissertations, exams, and make sure that every assessment task is something that would be required in the workplace.
I mean, I keep going back to AI. I guess I've messed a bit big on my bonnet about this, but that might start to drive it in that direction. It's interesting if you put a standard academic essay into Bard, it does a rather better job than most of your students would. But if you ask it those kind of more authentic assessments, it really struggles. So it hasn't got that kind of tacit knowledge, how things work, applying knowledge to a real world situation. So those of us that have been banging on about authentic assessment for ages, it might not be us that drives it, but it might be just the technology of just how easy AI is at answering a standard undergrad essay. Question there from Annie there, that she wonders if we can engage slightly earlier at secondary school or college. And yeah, great question, Annie. And to start out with people when they're perhaps 16 or 17 and thinking about routes in. So yeah, that's a really important point. And a few of the people who responded to the surveys were 16, 17 years old, who were doing countryside and related courses. So they're a really important group and not to forget about them. So thanks, Annie.
Yeah. Okay, and Sarah says she was told she could be a taxidermist. I'm sorry, we do have to wind up because we actually have a committee meeting after this. So if Annie would like to share the final slides, which let people know what the next events we're having are. In February, we've got
they're not up yet.
No, but I'm just going to talk through it because of the time. In February, we've got Dr. Tom Morehouse talking about his book, Ghosts in the Hedgerows, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but he's basically presenting the problem of what is causing the decline in hedgehogs as a murder mystery, which as an example of engaging the wider sort of community in thinking about ecological problems and the complexities is really effective. It's a very enjoyable book. It's going to be a very enjoyable talk. And yes, this issue of the complexity and how, who do you blame? Whose fault is it? And more importantly, what do we do about it is quite interesting. And then in March, we've got someone talking about great crested newts, and that will be our annual meeting at which we try to engage with the wider membership of the academia special interest group, which we do have about 300 CIEEM members signed up to it. And although we are very keen on engaging non-members, it's kind of, well, what do people want from the special interest group? And the other slide that we would have, if they were around, is details of the committee members, which is on the CIEEM website. And any CIEEM member, keen as we are to engage beyond CIEEM, we have to have CIEEM members as committee members. And if you're interested, if you've got any spare time, Greg, you're good at committees. You'd be very welcome to join. You can make a very
committees. Terrible with the spare time.
Yes, well, unfortunately, we're all in that situation. Yes, do consider joining us. With which I will say thank you. Oh, Annie, well done. Thank you very much to Alina. It was really interesting. Great use of the whiteboard facility, and I look forward to seeing the results. Do you want to go on to the next one, Annie? Next meet, yeah, there we are. So that gives you a view. And you've got a link there, which we could put in the chat, perhaps. There are recordings of all our previous discussion groups. And if anyone would like to contribute by leading one of these events, we're always grateful to hear from people. Okay, so we've got lots of things coming in the chat. The new natural history GCSE, I don't think it's making a huge amount of progress, but I've got a meeting about that tomorrow.
I mean, that could perhaps be interesting. People who've got like an admin role. So if someone works as an administrator, say a wildlife trust, then it'd be useful for them to have some ecological knowledge to be able to perform that kind of admin role. So there could be some good opportunities for career changes there too.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to say thank you very much and goodbye to everyone, except the committee members. Please stay on, committee members, because we have a meeting now. So thank you very much. And oh, a new message.
Yeah, thank you, Alina. I really enjoyed that.
Thanks. So thanks for good comments. Happy to connect.
Yeah. And I need to stop recording.
Everyone.
Am I sure I want to stop?